After 3 years of work and $2 billion spent, the scientists were finally ready. In the summer of 1945, the Manhattan Project achieved its goal. Now, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. When the United States dropped the bomb in 1945, it ended World War II and turned America into the world's most powerful nation. On the 12th of August 1945, the news the whole world had been waiting for finally broke. I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government, a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which means the unconditional surrender of Japan. But right now, as we speak, a second Manhattan Project is quietly underway. This time it is happening in China. No hype, no noise, no explosions. This time it is not a bomb or a missile. It is a computing race. China is working at full speed on artificial intelligence. Chinese scientists have built a super fast chip to power AI, smartphones, and modern weapons. The release of DeepSeek from a Chinese company alone should have been a wake-up call for the entire world. And just like the first Manhattan Project, this one was also born out of a war. In October 2022, the United States launched an economic attack on China that caused complete panic in Chinese markets overnight. Some companies lost 9 to 10% of their value in a single day. Companies outside China lost a combined $240 billion in market value. And all of this happened without firing a single bullet. The Biden administration published a sweeping set of export controls to slow China's progress in technology. These restrictions hit chip companies like Nvidia hard, with Nvidia warning that its China sales would drop significantly. So, how exactly did America try to stop China? To build an AI superpower, you have to pass through 3 gates. Gate 1 is the brain, the software used to design chips called Electronic Design Automation Software, or EDA. The Nvidia H100 chip has 80 billion transistors packed into a tiny piece of silicon. You cannot place all of those by hand. EDA software figures out the perfect position for every single piece on that chip. Without it, you simply cannot design a modern chip. Now, here's the important part. Only 3 companies in the world control 70 to 75% of this market: Synopsys, Cadence, and Mentor Graphics. All 3 are American. So, the US locked this software behind special licenses, meaning these companies could no longer sell or support their tools for Chinese clients without government approval. China was cut off from Gate 1. Gate 2 is the machine that actually prints the chip. Once a chip is designed, it has to be physically manufactured. This requires the most complex machine ever built, a lithography tool made by a Dutch company called ASML. This machine is the size of a bus, costs up to $350 million, and is the only machine on Earth capable of printing at 3 nanometers. To give you a sense of how small that is, a single coronavirus particle is 80 to 120 nanometers wide. 3 nanometers is 40 times smaller than that. Now, ASML is a Dutch company, so how did America stop it? The US found that ASML uses one critical American-made component, the light source, built in California. America told the Dutch, your machine cannot be built without our part. So from today you are banned from selling to China. ASML had no choice but to comply. China lost access to Gate 2. Gate 3 is the actual hardware, the Nvidia chips that run AI. In 2022 and 2023, the US set strict performance limits, making it illegal to sell any chip powerful enough to run serious AI workloads to China. On paper, the strategy was perfect. No software to design chips, no machine to build them, no hardware to run AI. Everyone assumed China was finished and America would dominate the AI race. But Washington made one massive mistake. They treated China like a normal market economy. They assumed Chinese companies would stop spending when they stopped making profits. The logic was simple. If you spend $1 billion and make nothing back, your investors lose faith, your debt piles up, and your company dies. That is how American companies work. But here's what they got wrong. The Chinese government simply said, we do not care about profits right now. We will keep funding our companies until we are completely independent of America. Cut cut the dependency first, talk about profits later. So, when Nvidia chips were blocked, Chinese engineers did not give up. They found a smarter way to work with weaker chips. The first clever move was something called the mixture of experts model, which is exactly what made DeepSeek so powerful. Let me explain it simply. Imagine a hospital where every single doctor attends every single patient. You walk in with a cut on your knee. The receptionist calls the brain surgeon, the heart specialist, the foot doctor, the pediatrician, and 200 other doctors. They all crowd into your room, look at your knee, have a big discussion, and finally agree that you need a bandage. The system works, but it is painfully slow, crowded, and absurdly expensive. DeepSeek changed the model completely. They still had 256 specialist doctors in the building, but they added a smart receptionist who acts as a router. You walk in with a knee problem. The receptionist sees it immediately and wakes up only the knee doctor. The other 254 doctors stay in the break room and are not paid for that hour. The result? The system is technically huge, but because only a small team handles each problem, it runs fast and costs a fraction of the price. You only pay for the 5% who actually worked, not the 95% who were resting. The American model is the hospital where everyone shows up for every patient. The Chinese model is the hospital where only the right doctor shows up. The second strategy was what I call the IKEA trick. When America banned the high-speed cables that allow chips to communicate with each other, DeepSeek engineers invented a new technique to compress data before moving it. Think of it this way. You need to move a sofa from one room to another, but someone came in and made the door smaller. The sofa is the data. The door is the cable. The rooms are the chips. Instead of giving up, the Chinese simply broke the sofa down into flat IKEA parts, carried them through the small door, and rebuilt it on the other side. They turned the data into a compressed file, passed it through the smaller connection, and reassembled it perfectly. Problem solved. The third move was the energy strategy. The Nvidia H100 chip is like a powerful truck. It handles heavy work efficiently. The H20, which China was allowed to buy, is more like a scooter. To do the same job, you need 7 H20 chips wired together, and together they consume nearly 4 times more electricity than a single H100. So the whole operation becomes far more expensive and far less efficient. But China had an answer. They said, if we need 4 times more electricity, we will simply make electricity 4 times cheaper. And so they launched something called the East Data West Computing Project. Here is how to understand it. China is divided by an invisible line. The east side holds 94% of the population on 43% of the land. The west side has 57% of the land, but only 6% of the population. In the west, you can drive for hours and see no one. Land is essentially free. So China turned this empty land into the world's biggest energy machine. Tencent dug 5 tunnels into a mountain and built a data center with 50,000 servers inside a cave, naturally cooled by the mountain temperature, saving millions on air conditioning. They plan to scale it to 300,000 servers. In the Gobi Desert, China installed millions of solar panels set to deliver 450 gigawatts of renewable power. To put that in perspective, that is more than Germany and Brazil combined. India at its peak summer demand uses around 250 gigawatts. A Chinese desert produces more power than the entire country of India needs at its busiest moment. And then China built underwater data centers, massive sealed cylinders filled with servers, sunk to the ocean floor, naturally cooled by the water around them. No fans, no air conditioning, no dust, no fire risk. Deserts became solar farms, mountains became natural refrigerators. Rivers became power sources. The ocean floor became a cooling system. This is how China powered an inefficient chip stack without breaking a sweat. On top of all this, the government offered a 50% electricity discount to data centers in the western regions, but only if they used Chinese-made chips. This forced companies away from Nvidia and toward Huawei chips. Huawei got steady revenue, reinvested it into research, and kept growing. In 2023 alone, Huawei received over $1 billion in direct government grants, free money recorded openly in their annual report. China also poured $47 billion into its semiconductor industry, specifically targeting companies that were losing money, giving them time to grow rather than forcing them to shut down. Compare that to the US, where it took years of political debate to give Intel $8.5 billion in loans. China moved instantly, with one clear condition: remove America from your supply chain completely. The result of all this is that China has now built a fully independent technology ecosystem. It is no longer vulnerable to American restrictions. DeepSeek challenged the best AI models in the world. Huawei's Ascend chips are replacing Nvidia. Harmony OS is replacing Windows. And renewable energy from the Gobi Desert is replacing coal. The US sanctions were supposed to destroy these Chinese companies. Instead, they worked like a vaccine. They made China sick for a while, but now China is completely immune. In fact, when the US recently tried offering Nvidia chips to China again, hoping to make them dependent on American technology once more, China said no. They have their own chips now, and they are not letting American dependency back in. And honestly, that single word, no, might be the most expensive word America has ever heard. Because think about what just happened. America spent decades making the world dependent on its technology. Every country used American software. Every factory ran on American chips. Every AI model was trained on American hardware. And China was the biggest customer of all. But the moment America tried to use that dependency as a weapon, China did something nobody expected. It did not beg. It did not negotiate. It went silent, went to work, and 3 years later came back with its own version of everything. That is not just a tech story. That is a warning to every country that has ever trusted a single supplier for something critical. Because when that supplier decides to cut you off, you have two choices: collapse or build. China chose to build. And what it built is not just impressive, it is terrifying if you're sitting in Washington right now. Because China is not keeping this technology to itself. It is already offering its AI stack, its chips, its energy systems, and its infrastructure to countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. Countries that America largely ignored. Countries that have been waiting for a cheaper, faster, and more accessible alternative. And China is walking in with exactly that. So the US thought it was putting China in a cage. But China built an entirely new world outside that cage. And now it is handing the keys of that world to half the planet. That is the real game that is being played right now. Not just a chip war, not just an AI race. A battle for who gets to build the future and whose rules that future runs on. And this brings us to the 3 lessons this entire story teaches us. Lesson 1: a sanction is only as powerful as the weakness of the country it targets. If you are a weak nation with no engineers, no scientists, and no plan, a sanction will destroy you completely. But if you are a nation with talent, determination, and a government willing to back its own people, the same sanction becomes fuel. It forces you to stop being lazy. It forces you to stop depending on others. And it forces you to build something you should have built a long time ago. That is exactly what happened with China. America handed China the greatest motivation in its modern history and called it a punishment. Lesson 2: there is a massive difference between a company fighting for profits and a nation fighting for survival. American companies answer to shareholders every 3 months. If the numbers are not good, the stock drops, the CEO gets nervous, and the strategy changes. That is the game American tech runs on. China played a completely different game. The Chinese government told its companies, "We do not care if you lose money for 5 years. We do not care if the world laughs at your early chips. Keep building, keep failing, keep improving, and we will keep the lights on." That kind of patience does not exist in a profit-first system, and that patience is exactly why China won this round. Lesson 3, and this is the one that most people completely overlook: whoever controls energy controls the future. AI is not just a software problem. It is an electricity problem. Every single AI model you use, every chatbot, every image generator, every recommendation algorithm, it is all running on servers that consume enormous amounts of power. And as AI gets bigger and more powerful, the electricity demand is going to multiply in a way most people are not prepared for. China understood this early. While America was busy writing laws about chip exports, China was quietly building the largest clean energy infrastructure in human history. It is not just the Gobi Desert solar farms. It is not just the mountain data centers. China today produces more electricity than the United States, India, and the entire European Union combined. Let that sink in for a second. One country produces more power than those three combined, and they are still building. So when people ask how China is going to keep running its inefficient chips at scale, the answer is simple. Because electricity in China is becoming so cheap and so abundant that inefficiency stops being a problem. When power costs almost nothing, you can afford to run 4 chips where America runs 1. Now, this brings us to the question that every Indian watching this right now needs to sit with seriously. India is the world's most populated country. India has world-class engineers, brilliant scientists, and one of the fastest growing economies on earth. But India today produces roughly 5 times less electricity than China. 5 times less. And we are entering an age where electricity is not just comfort. It is competitive power. Every AI lab, every data center, every chip factory. Understanding doesn't mean you can prevent it, but you can prepare, protect yourself and family, even profit if you see what's coming. Key is, don't get caught in narratives people tell during bubble phase. Oh, this time is different. We're different. We learned from history. No, we're not different. Pattern repeats because human nature doesn't change. Greed, fear, ambition, desire for power. These are constants. Technology changes, names change, underlying dynamics same. The Dutch thought they were special. British thought empire would last forever. Americans think dollar will always be reserve currency. Chinese will probably think same when it's their turn. But cycle always continues, rise and decline, over and over. Understanding this gives perspective, helps you see through propaganda and narratives, helps make better decisions. So that's the big cycle. Empires rise and fall in predictable patterns driven by education, innovation, trade, reserve, currency status, then decline, driven by debt, inequality, conflict, and rise of new challenger. We're watching this in real time with US and China. It's going to be wild over the next few decades. The transitions between empires are always the most dangerous periods. Lots of uncertainty, potential for conflict, but also opportunity. If you understand what's happening, the key is recognize the pattern. Don't get emotionally attached to any particular outcome. Stay flexible, protect yourself. This cycle has repeated throughout history and will continue repeating. Empires come and go, currencies rise and fall, power shifts from one center to another, but life goes on. Individuals and families who understand these patterns and prepare accordingly do better than those caught by surprise. So, pay attention to the metrics, education, innovation, trade balances, debt levels, inequality, political stability, military power, reserve currency status. Watch how these evolve over time. You'll see the pattern unfolding. Right now, all signs point to of US past peak in decline phase, while China in rise phase. Doesn't mean China will dominate, could be multipolar world, but US dominance is clearly ending. This will be painful transition, especially for Americans used to being top dog, but understanding why it's happening makes it easier to navigate. You're not a victim of mysterious forces, you're watching a predictable historical pattern play out. Armed with that knowledge, you can make smart decisions about where to live, where to invest, what skills to develop, how to position yourself and your family for what comes next. That's the value of understanding these big cycles. If this perspective changed how you see current events, hit like, comment where you think we are in cycle and whether US-China transition will be peaceful or violent, and subscribe because understanding these big picture patterns is crucial for navigating chaos ahead. Thanks for watching Fiscoria.